So the best I could describe it is coming out of historical documentation that I've encountered in my dig through the record. And so there's quite a bit of documentation to the cultural significance of the Amikwa and the Amikwa story. And so it comes at us through this knowledge that was passed down through the oral historian of a great beaver that came and affected the territory we live in through the formation of the river systems. And that's the explanation they gave of how it came to be. And so the progenitor of our totemic system was being held as being created by the great beaver through time that formed the tributaries of the river systems into the damming systems that were found naturally, and they attribute it to the great beaver as creating all that, which caused that to be incorporated into our totemic system that formed tradition, culture, and law, practices of how to for people to interact with one another and how to ensue the trade network that was found here after quite some time of developing that with association with other groups. It's mentioned in the historical record that totemic identity was expanded through issues of alliance with other groups. So non-totemic groups are found in the historical archaeological record to have encountered their way into this territory, and evidence showing that they were incorporated into the legal framework of the totemic system with ceremony or marriage alliances or whatever occurred to produce it. And so it all led to the symbiosis of the system and the advancement of the network, so the expansion.
But
the fur trading that was sparked up here in the early days of contacts. So the European came to realize that there were commodities here that were easily utilized by them, which was the trade network of the fur. So in Europe there was a demand that was created for the fur products, and they employed native hunters in order to produce that material. So the reason why there was an Amikwa people was because of the abundance of beaver that was found in this region. And naturally they modeled their society against how the beaver propagated itself. So it was beaver being nature's master builder, producing dams, their system of social networking amongst the beaver, the rodent beaver clans was modeled into the people, and so they used that to direct their lifestyles. And I think that a great many people became identified under the totemic identity of the beaver people simply because of the territorial expansion that occurred, and most of it was employed by the invention of the canoe. And so the canoe was integral to the beaver people's association because of the accessibility that they were granted. And so the use of the canoe caused this network of people to expand into vast amount of territory. So it found its way up many tributaries of the river system, and they became unified and known under the beaver people emblem. And so the beaver people are one grouping of many groupings in the totemic system. And so each group was influxed by marriage or alliance or warfare. So once upon a time, warfare was dictated not so much by products or goods, but it was ensued by the position of women and children. And so captives in war would consist of women and children as being the foundational reason for making war in the first place. So as a certain specific group would be at a loss, they would try to replenish those captives with those people with captives that they would encounter in other groupings. So that's how they kept the nations alive, was by, it was counted in women and children, not in piles of goods. You know. British Crown is hierarchy. It's monarchy. It's a tiered system. I think when it came to totemic systems, it was more equalized. It was more individualized. It had to do so. I was pondering this subject quite extensively, and what I came up with was the understanding of the sovereignty in the soles of our feet. And so sovereignty by Anishinaabe is held where they stand. And so in the immediate area around them becomes their sovereignty in how to express it. So people being unified under the totemic system became ingrained in an economy and an economic system that fostered unity in a way that made sure that people were provided for. That you can see it in the modern day when you go into homeless camps. You'll see where in a homeless camp that nobody goes without food or water. And it's just an underlying understanding among the homeless that they can't tolerate any one of them to go without food or water. So that becomes a major underlying staple within their society. And so we can see that within the native groups of before, that nobody was to go without in the basic fundamentals. So we have documentation that describes and shows that was substance for their existence. I'm modernizing that in our context because we have a situation under the French and English regimes that leave people without. And so that's, I think, is a major contradiction that we have between the two systems that we're promoting. And I'm very adamant to stress that our totemic system is alive and well. I think it had to do with the warfaring that was being made, the alliances that were built. We had a existence with the French regime for 150 years before the onset of the English ideas and system. So in the French regime, our people had it stressed to them many, many times to not trust the English. And so there's documentation we could produce that shows that was a situation. And so there's articles where when it changed hands from French to English occupations in these regions, that a great many of the people moved themselves out of the way. And so they went north and they went west to avoid, the reason given was to avoid enumeration by the English, because they didn't want, in the mistrust of the English, they didn't want the English to understand our strength in numbers. And so it causes, to the modern day, it's caused a lot of trouble in relationship to the administration of the English, which is called Canada, in relationship to the Native Nation, in being held as what appears to be as enemy, and also in our reluctance to identify ourselves for the longest time. So we're dealing with the ramifications of of how we're lacking clarified position within the system of history and the system of law.
Yeah, well, I think it demonstrates the difficulty and confusion that has been left to us from the interactions of the British and the various nations here. I guess all around what you'd call Canada, and those problems that were created by their insistence of their position would always be first over ours is now I guess a cause for us beginning to recognize and look at the true history of our relationship and where we came from and what we had as nations and what still exists, because they are essentially occupiers of our land yet, and they've been taking all the resources that they could to make themselves wealthy, and they have. And meantime, they pushed our people onto these concentration camps called reserves, and they've manipulated their laws to say that we weren't human, or that we were some sort of subhuman that didn't have any legal rights in their legal system, the Indian Act. This is a British legal system, and so even that's totally flawed. But now we're beginning to get back at the truth. What are the rights of our nations here versus these occupiers of our lands, and why are they claiming things that they have no right to claim? And so we've got just hundreds of things to try to sort out, and we still own the land. We still own the treaty lands. You haven't purchased those from us, as your original 1763 Royal Proclamation says. And we're trying to at least bring this up to a modern interpretation, because it is the truth. Hi everyone, my name is Del Riley. I'm former president of the National Indian Brotherhood. I was involved as the national president. It was my position that we needed protection in Canada's highest law, the Constitution. I then proceeded to implement it and get them put in the Constitution, which after a long, hard fight, we finally got some of the sections in. The two important ones were Section 25 and 35. This book contains how this all came about, 8 years of PB in residential schools. I had to go back and relive some of the horror of residential schools. I'd like to dedicate this book to all of the survivors out there. Purchase this book below.